Greek traveller Herodotus, who came here in the 450s BC, said that he was told by tour guides that it took 20 years with gangs of 100,000 men to do it.
The ancient Greeks, with typical cockiness, called them pyramids after the triangular cakes they knew back home. We can see them now in the light of the artificial mountains built by other cultures, Babylonians, Maya and Aztec. For all civilizations have sought validation for their power over the masses by creating great public symbols. But more than that, the dead king is now a manifestation of the sun god himself.
When the construction job was finished, the pyramids were covered with a case of fine Tura limestone. And although most of that has disappeared over the centuries, you can see over there on Khephrun's pyramid, the top coating is still there. That's what they looked like. But what were they for? They were tombs, but what did the shape mean? Well, the pyramid clearly was what it seems to be, a staircase on which the king's spirit could ascend to heaven and then go back to his tomb. And what we're looking at over here is an image of the rays of the sun god coming down to earth. A typical piece of the Egyptian imagination in which an immaterial concept is represented in such a material form. And on winter's days here in Giza, you can actually sit here and watch the sun breaking through the clouds and falling down at the same angle as the pyramids. A stairway to heaven then, the rays of the sun on which the king, nimble and wise, could ascend to the indestructible stars.
The Egyptians created the world's first unified state. In modern terms, it was a provider state, providing a basic standard of living to all its people through control of irrigation, in return for enormous surpluses to be spent on tombs, temples and palaces. Through these great buildings, it expressed its ideologies of power, its belief in the indivisibility of divine and earthly rule, in the need for a stable cosmos. Such ideas may have been essential needs of civilization at the start. And yet even today, almost all of us still live in nation-states with some or all of those same characteristics. Our thinking is still shaped by their religious and social myths, and especially by the myth of the great ruler, king or god. For it was in his name in the Bronze Age that the many surrendered power to the few, to live in the condition in which most of the people of the planet still live today.
Worship of the great ruler was perhaps a necessary stage in the development of civilization. But even now, in the TV age, kings and presidents and popes use the vast array of visual aids invented here and which we see all around us to boost their authority. And do we not still engage in ruler worship ourselves whenever we cheer a presidential motorcade as it sweeps by, or celebrate the jubilee of the Queen of England as she passes escorted by beefeaters in 16th century costume, or watch musketeers give an antiquated salute on the White House lawn? Perhaps then we are only just emerging from the spell of the Bronze Age revolution which created civilization and shaped our ways of thinking. In the long term in history, we are perhaps still too close to them to see ourselves as we really are.
In ancient Egypt, the ties binding people to the state were not only economic, but religious. And the great event in its religious life was the pilgrimage to Abydos. Each year, thousands of people set out for the little town in Middle Egypt, to celebrate the resurrection of Osiris, king of the dead. The pilgrimage provided a focus for the feelings of ordinary Egyptians, and rather like Hindus today at Benares or Shia Muslims at Kerbala, many asked to be brought to Abydos for burial. And at Abydos, we find another of Egypt's great legacies to the world. It's still a haunting place, cradled in an immense curve of the western cliffs, the realm of the dead. A holy place since prehistory. In the ruins of the sacred city, the Temple of Seti I, built in 1300 BC, still survives. It's one of the peaks of ancient art. Moving from daylight into its darkened inner sanctum, the visitor has an uncanny intimation of a still active residue of spiritual power. Long before the Christians and Muslims, even ordinary Egyptians came to believe in an eternal soul, in a last judgment, and in resurrection after death. These great conceptions were acted out in a public passion play at Abydos, and are depicted on the temple walls here as a rite of passage for King Seti himself. Here too are many motifs familiar to Christians, especially the role of the Divine Mother, Isis.
Here Isis is caressing Seti on her knee, and she says to him, "You're my son, come out of me. I have nourished you that you may be lord of the two lands. I have made your body strong in victory against all the enemies who may come against you. Your majesty is king of eternity, a falcon abiding forever." And here's Isis giving the breath of life to Seti, and above her, her words are, "You have made your mansion, your temple, to magnify our nature, and adorned it with all kinds of excellent stonework. And your reward for this will be the lifespan of the sky, or as long as Abydos shall exist." At first sight, these gestures and actions may seem archaic and bizarre. But if you just step back a little and think, for example, what a Muslim or a Buddhist or even a Protestant would make of seeing for the first time a solemn Roman Catholic Mass, then a lot of those tender gestures, which are so familiar to Christians, would lose their meaning. In all religions in the world, simple and often strange gestures can carry profound truths. And it was just the same in Egyptian religion, which certainly did not lack ethical content. But the key to understanding the function of this great building lies in these little chapels just at the end of this room. In this inner shrine is the climax to the whole ritual. It's concerned with the installation of King Seti, not only as Osiris's heir as a living king, but with his union with Osiris after death. And here Isis and Horus perform rituals for him, and Seti is now dead and deified. Here he's represented as a mummy in a white wrap. And over there on the far wall, blackened by smoke and age, Seti, restored to the colours of living flesh and blood, comes into the presence of Osiris, where he will become one, resurrected himself, with the resurrected King of the Dead.
So the simple and strange gestures reveal a simple yet profound message. A belief in righteousness on earth, in the Last Judgment, in eternal life, though not in damnation, which had no place in the Egyptians' optimistic view of things. But these ideas would play a key role in the later development of Christianity and of Islam. Out in the desert at Abydos, millions of broken pots still lie where the ancient pilgrims left them as offerings to their god. For them, the wind roaring down the great gorge in the western cliffs was the sound of the spirits of the dead, whose annual pilgrimage to Osiris, they believed, would continue as long as Abydos exists. In 332 BC, Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great. And then Egyptian civilization turned away from its immemorial roots towards the sea and a wider world. On the Mediterranean coast, a new capital was founded which became the meeting place of Europe and Asia on the shore of Africa, Alexandria. The greatest market in the inhabited world, wrote the Roman Strabo. Beacon to traders from all nations who came by land and sea, bearing spices from South India and the treasures of the Silk Route to China. It's paradise here, said the poet Herodas. You can get anything you want. Money, shows, games, women, wine, boys, the best library in the world. In short, all earthly delights. Like 20s New York, Hellenistic Alexandria was a land of opportunities whose streets were paved with gold. It drew immigrants of all kinds: bankers, clerks, engineers, poets, even religious dropouts. These extraordinary mummy portraits allow us literally to look into the eyes of such people. Even we feel to sense their hopes and fears. Vain and violent, rich and prosperous, it was said, they've only one god here, Mammon. Our good life in Alexandria was brief, wrote the poet Cavafi. But how potent were the perfumes, how splendid the bed on which we lay, and to what sensual delight we gave our bodies. Down here in the catacombs of Alexandria, you can still enter that weird and wonderful world where Egyptian and Greek and Jewish and Oriental religion and magic met and intermingled. The Greeks who came here to Egypt were very open-minded about the local gods. The deep experience of Mediterranean paganism made it easy for them to identify Amun with Zeus, or to say the Egyptians worshipped Aphrodite, the goddess of love, but they called her Hathor. And how that worked in practice, you can see in this astonishing tomb deep below the streets of Alexandria. At first sight, it looks like a typically Egyptian tomb with papyrus columns and the winged disk of the sun behind and the row of cobras' heads. But when you look closer, you notice human figures in ancient Egyptian poses but with Greco-Roman faces. And on each side of the door, guardian serpents, but carrying the snake-entwined staff of Hermes, the Greek guide of souls, and above them, Medusa's heads. And when you go inside the tomb itself,
you can see that the sarcophagi are decorated